Hello viewers, this is Steve Brulé with Studio Brulé, and you are on Coffee Break, a casual conversation about things that have come across my desk in the last typically 24 to 48 hours. My coffee on the go. Welcome Michael, Nature of Nurture, and other folks out there. Rory, just flipping back here a little bit. Furry Kitten. Okay. So there's been quite a few things since yesterday, and in fact there's quite a few things yesterday that I didn't get around to. So I've grouped them, a few of them, into the update on the Wet'suwet'en and the rail blockades in Canada and where that's coming from. And I'm following this one in part because I'm from Canada, and in part, other part, because this is not just a Canadian issue. This is a textbook analysis or textbook case happening right in front of our eyes about what happens when a country gets taken over by leftists and the government in power and the people in power do not enforce the law and create a climate in which criminal leftists feel safe to escalate their criminal behavior. And that's what's going on in Canada today. And there's starting to be quite a few people writing about this, which is a good sign that it's not just us regular folks who notice what's going on. But we'll talk about that as well. So first I'll start off with a few small clips, short clips, just to get us going here. And here is a comment in the Toronto Sun by a fellow named, or a lady, I think, Lori Goldstein. Trump's America leads the world in cutting greenhouse gases. Isn't that amazing? And the Trump's America is withdrawing from things like the Paris Climate Accord. So in spite of that, they still beat Canada on cutting greenhouse gases, and by a long margin. This was written February 19th. Just a couple of quotes from this article. The reason U.S. emissions are dropping so dramatically is that what actually lowers emissions is not the endless virtue signaling on the issue of man-made climate change by Trudeau and his cabinet ministers. Imagine that. Posturing and virtue signaling doesn't actually create positive change. Who'd have guessed? Everybody but the Liberals, apparently. Most notably, Foreign Environment Minister Catherine McKenna, sorry, I missed a couple here. Okay, I'll start over. What actually lowers emissions isn't the endless virtue signaling on the issue of man-made climate change by Trudeau and his cabinet ministers, most notably former Environment Minister Catherine McKenna, nor never-ending alarmism by environmental radicals, nor is it by vilifying Trump as a climate denier for pulling out of the Paris Climate Accord. What lowers emissions is technological innovation and market forces. Yeah. I got to highlight this comment. Thanks, Michael. I can't agree more. Help Steve buy more coffee. I love it. Thank you. Which does raise a good point. As YouTube demonetizes everything we do, our donations become our main source of income here to keep things going. But a little good news on that front. Two of the last two, I think, of the coffee breaks were remonetized. Now, I don't know what's different. I think I get just as passionate and about the same issues in every one of these coffee breaks. So, who knows? But anyways, getting back to the issue at hand here, and one of the reasons that all this hand-wringing and virtue signaling doesn't have any positive effect on climate change is in part because these people aren't really the people behind these climate change things aren't really interested in the climate. They're interested in pushing their political ideology and their globalized government and socialism around the world. And issues like climate change are just grist for them. They're just an issue to be used in their other goals, to further their other goals. And we're going to see a couple of articles written on that topic today. Let's move on to another quote here. These are a little off the top items I'm not going to talk about too deeply. A woman falsely accused a Navy sailor of rape. It wasn't her first false report either. This is getting to be more and more common, not just in the Navy, of course, around the entire culture. In this case, the reason the woman gave when she was finally caught, and who knows how many other kinds of manipulative things she's done other than false accusations of rape. She's obviously not someone to be trusted. She fabricated the report against the sailor out of the fear that her significant other would end their relationship if he learned what happened, prosecutors wrote in an agreed statement of facts. Well, there you go. We've seen this a lot of times in the news. A woman has an affair, then regrets it and afraid her boyfriend finds out, so she accuses the guy of rape. An awful lot of that going on. Here's an article here on Spiked Online, brought up by Dennis Gauss. Trans is beautiful. And in this article, they are claiming that anyone who has a different opinion other than 100% support of everybody should become the gender they choose when they choose to become that gender, no matter what the science or the psychology says on the matter. You are the ones hit witch hunting, apparently, according to Spiked Online. The great delusion of our time, I think, is that transgenderism is a common and healthy thing. It is body dysmorphia. Trans is a powerful myth which explains how it demands some curious mental gymnastics and strange doctrines. Yes. First was the notion that having cosmetic surgery can change your sex. You can't, but you can't change your chromosomes, because you can't change your chromosomes or your biology. I never have and never will menstruate or give birth. Then came the idea that you can change your sex through performative utterance by merely declaring you have done so. And now comes the literally unreal dogma that babies have no sex. Okay, I was confusing this with another article, but in this article they are critical of the uncritical acceptance of the popular trans community's claims. And I'm going to repeat this again. I've repeated this in the past. I am sympathetic to people who are suffering from body dysmorphia. And I am in favor of us seeking treatments for these things. But it's important, I think, to always clearly keep in mind that body dysmorphia is a psychological problem. It's a very serious one, but we shouldn't pretend that because you think you are something that you're not, that in fact you are not that because you think you are not that. I'm getting that all twisted up, but I think you catch my meaning on this. Did we read that quote? Yeah. So this goes all the way in a progress of thought to the claim that babies have no sex. Now here, Spiked Online, again, I think this is, okay. And regard the degree to which people have internalized transphobia as a modern-day blasphemy against this religion, a heresy against the Church of Trans, with so many people terrified to speak openly and honestly about it. And this is very important. This is a very important issue. The rise of trans people in the past decade. And I think in one country I read that it's gone up something like 1,500% or something like that. And yet, we're not allowed to talk about it openly and honestly. And that's true, because you'll be run out of town, run out of the culture, ahead of a mob with pitchforks and fire trying to burn you to the ground. It is nothing more than a case of hysteria, a modern-day delusion, a phenomenon that one day will, or should, be studied alongside witch hunts and alien abductions. And that's all on that one today. I do have a folder here, and that should have been put into the trans folder, and I guess I didn't get into that. I get that over there, so there's more to come on the news about transgender issues. Fernando says that the Trudeau experiment is over. And this is a good article worth reading if you want to know something about how Trudeau has remarkably damaged Canada in the short space of 5 years. Lawbreakers, and this is, I think, referring to the obvious rise in lawbreakers surrounding these rail blockades. They are actually throwing creating fires around railway tracks, trying to derail rail cars, and celebrating when they succeed at these things, at their blockades. Lawbreakers are emboldened like never before, realizing that the Trudeau Liberal government is too weak to confront them and too scared to actually defend and enforce the rule of law. I think that's quite accurate. And here, this is one I just pulled out. Yeah, I just thought just moments before coming on today, and we're going to deal more with Trudeau and his on a section on the update of the blockades. But I wanted to get that right out there in front of you. Miranda Everett is highlighting an article in the USA Today that says the Southern Poverty Law Center is a hate-based scam that nearly caused me something, something, something. That's the headline. The essence of it is that the SPLC is itself a hate movement with ulterior motives that are destroying honest people's lives. The SPLC has chosen to take the easy path, to intimidate and mislead for raw political power and financial benefit. It is a feminist organization, by the way, and feminism by any measure is a hate movement. So imagine the irony of a group that claims to stand against hate movements and out them, publicly identify and humiliate other groups, that is itself based on an ideology of outright pure hate. And that's what SPLC is. And worse, they have been, what have I got here going on? They have been propping up or attacking political groups that they politically disagree with and labeling them as hate groups merely for political purposes and for fundraising purposes. For years, and it's amazing how long this is taking to come out, because I think there have been reports on the bad behaviors of SPLC probably going back a decade now. For years, former employees revealed, local journalists reported, and commentators have lamented, the Southern Poverty Law Center is not what it claims to be. It is not what it claims to be. It itself is a hate group, and it has political motives and financial motives. Not a pure-hearted, clear-headed legal advocate for the vulnerable, but rather an obscenely wealthy marketing scheme. So there you have it, folks. And yet, the liberal left end of our society constantly quotes SPLC as some kind of authority on hate groups. That's the status of the left today. But good news that it's coming out. They cannot contain their lies anymore. It's just too much of it, and it's too obvious. And everyone needs to take notice. And I want to take this minute to thank Nature of Nurture very much for generously donating to us here today. We appreciate every donation and all our viewers. Thanks again, the Nature of Nurture. Let me move on to another quote from this article. These shameful secrets are no longer hidden in shadows. The New York Times, Politico, NPR, and a host of other mainstream publications are reporting on the corruption and widening credibility gap. Well, they're just noticing now what we've all been talking about for a decade, but it's about time you caught up, the New York Times. The SPLC, as an institution, has thoroughly disqualified itself as an arbiter of justice. Well, it's about time that people are taking notice of this. Now, I want to point out also that I didn't screen capture this, but there was some article I saw on Facebook today, and I didn't have a chance to hunt it down and see if it's really legit, but I'll just throw it out there if somebody else wants to research this issue, that Snopes is in bed with Facebook and other social media companies colluding to help determine that some stories are false, not because they're false, but because it suits Facebook and other social media sites that Snopes calls them false. And some of their inside employees are apparently talking about this now publicly. So have a look. I'm not going to look into that unless it comes across my face more clearly. I'm not going to do any research about it. But so I don't know how legit that claim is. But if somebody wants to look into it, I'd be happy to hear back from you. Here from Pat Kampanpati, which I'm sure I'm pronouncing his name right, on Facebook, makes a comment on top of this Taylor Swift news, who's made a video, a rather hateful, misandric video, crapping all over all men. And Pat says, progressive racists signaled their virtues via whites in blackface in the 1920s. In the 2020s, progressive feminists signal their virtues via women in male face. It's exactly true. One day this will follow Taylor Swift, and she will have to own it, like Trudeau has to own his blackface. He has many instances of blackface. And now from the description of this video that Taylor Swift put out, it is quite an orgy of hatred against men. And apparently she's angry about her contract. Here, a quote from the article, in one notable scene, Swift's male character spreads his legs wide on the subway, unnecessarily crowding women next to him, and ashes a cigar in the purse of his neighbor. This is stuff that no man anywhere has ever been seen doing. But Taylor Swift is riding on public tolerance of misandry and the public hunger for examples of humiliating men. Taylor Swift is taking advantage of that. I can't say I never followed her music, but the few times I've been told it's one of her songs, it hasn't been very impressive to me. But anyways, I guess I'm not a 13-year-old feminist. It's an obvious jab at music industry mogul Scooter Braun, who has a majority stake in the master recordings of Swift's first 6 albums. Okay, so let's just look at the entitlement of this spoilt kid here. All right. The video is another notch in Swift's belt as she goes public about her struggles for independence and control of her own voice as an artist who found massive fame young. Well, hold on, let's back that up a bit. She did not find massive fame young. It was given to her, created for her by Scooter Braun. And now she wants to cut him out of the loop, even though he is the sole reason for her skyrocket to success. She is so unaware of the help she's received and the reasons for her success that she feels she's being hard done by as one of the richest pop stars in history and even at a young age. It's unbelievable that such a spoiled, entitled, privileged, rich, white woman, all of those qualifiers apply to her, can be such an arrogant hater. Okay, here's another little quick tidbit that came out, and I've got a few things to say about this. I tweeted this exact tweet here. This is a copy of the tweet I put out on this issue. Teen girl beat the boys to become the first female wrestler to win in her weight category. Now, I looked around and I searched the internet to find out what's the age of these people. What are the age of the people that they're talking about? Because the first thing that occurs to me is, okay, let's look at her weight category. 106 pounds is the lightest weight category there is in high school wrestling. Now, at 106 pounds, there probably are a lot of 106-pound fully grown, mature women in high school, 16 to 18 years old. But I suspect that the 106-pound boys that are there are 13 or less, not fully mature, not fully coordinated, not very experienced at wrestling. But let's take a look at a few more details in the wrestling here. Here are the weight classes in that wrestling organization. 106 pounds is the lightest. And here's a statement by their policies on their for wrestlers, the gender of the player. A student may participate based on the gender noted on the student's certificate of birth. Fine. Women shall not participate on a men's interscholastic athletic team where the school has a women's team in the same sport, or where a school sends an entry to the women's state playoffs in the same sport. Okay, this appears to be to ensure that this is that women are able to participate in the sport of their choice if it doesn't exist for women at their high school. That's how I'm reading it, which is fine, I suppose, on a superficial level. In cases where women are permitted on a men's team, the school forfeits all participation in the women's playoffs in the same sport. So I guess they can't play women on both women and men's in the same sport. Men's rules will be used where women play on men's teams. That's fine. That's actually a good rule. But here's the final point. Men's shall not participate on women's teams in any sport. Men cannot participate on women's teams in any sport. So if they're allowing of women to participate on men's team is because there might not be a comparable women's team on that sport, if that was the reason, then wouldn't the same reason apply to men be able to compete on a women's team if there is no comparable men's team in that sport? That would be fair, but it's not that way. Men are not given the same opportunity. Now, I just want to say a couple of things about the fairness of whether a young girl should be allowed to participate with the young boys' teams in general. When I was growing up, by the time I was 11 years old, I think, or even 8 years old, I knew full well that you could not put all your force when you're competing with a woman. I mean, it was drilled into your head. You can't, not only can you not hit women, you can't really try hard against women. By 12 years old, all boys know to operate at 50% and are even reluctant to try to win, because there's no winning when you put a young boy in with a young girl. If he loses, he's ridiculed like crazy for being beat by a girl, and if he wins, he's ridiculed like crazy for beating a girl. It is absolutely unfair to put the boys in that position, to have them have to fight with that no-win situation and that moral dilemma in their sport of choice. So those boys that played against her, and in fact, she claimed that it was an easy victory for her. She bragged about that, and I don't doubt it is. She apparently started wrestling at 6 years old, and she was probably at least 16 or maybe 18 at that competition. So she was practically 10 or 12 years of wrestling experience. And then she goes into a field of boys who are probably 12 and 13 years old, not fully developed, and who are not allowed psychologically, socially, to put their best effort out. So she walks through the field and then brags about it. And all the boys can't complain, because that would be unseemly as well. And they can't put their 100% effort out, because that would be unseemly as well. So all of the boys in that competition were denied a fair competition. Every last boy in there is affected by that psychological reality. So no, I don't agree with this in any manner, shape, or form. It's abusive of the young boys, and it deprives them of one of the few areas in life where they can have all-male camaraderie, where they can actually test themselves legitimately against other men and boys. And yet the media is portraying this up as some great success for our culture and for this young girl in particular. And I'm sorry, that it wasn't a test for that young girl. She walked through that field in part because those boys stood aside and let her walk through that field. That's what I think anyways. Okay, let me get on to a couple of other things here. I think that's all of the short items that I had today. Let me just see here, yeah. And before we get to the Wet'suwet'en group, we'll just update on a couple of issues on the transgender issue that have come around here. And let's see here, what have I got here? Okay, so we started a little bit talking about the transgender issue in the quick clips. So here is, I think I referred to this during that discussion. This came out 2 days ago. Sweden's teenage gender dysphoria number jumps 1,500% in 10 years. Sounds like perhaps a psychological issue spreading through general hysteria, possibly, encouraged by the fact there's a strong rewards for and praise for identifying as that, as a strong psychological force pushing people in that direction, as well as almost non-stop negativity thrown upon young boys and men. I mean, who always being accused of being a rapist or a murderer or a toxic masculinity. All of these are psychic forces that nobody wants to be associated to that. Impressionable young confused boys are going to say, well, I'm not a rapist, I'm not toxic, I'm not a bad person, so I must not be male. Children as young as 12 can legally change their gender in Sweden. Children as young as 12 years old. LGBT group RFSL, Sweden's Social Democrats, proposed a law in the fall of 2018 to remove all need for parental consent for teenagers to transition, as well as lowering the legal age of medical assistance for transitioning from 18 to 15. So here we have it. We just talked about the witch hunts against anybody who wants to talk honestly about this issue, and in spite of, while they're witch hunting anyone who expresses opinion on the issue, they are busy making it easy to permanently change the bodies of children. And this stuff is not researched and not tested. And those research, that research that has been done, they're not fully researched and tested, and that research that has been done is indicating that it doesn't address, transitioning does not address the underlying problem of high rates of suicide ideation. Somebody mentioned up here in a comment that most of the dysphoria was girls. There's no doubt that it is a common illness in both boys and girls. There's boys and girls, and there may be, each individual case may have different reasons or that push them or cause their dysphoria. So I'm obviously addressing the male side of it more than the female side of it. Both sides need addressing, and in both cases, whether it's male to female, female to male, rushing to a medical solution that permanently changes that person's body is a bad thing to do. Creating laws to allow it to be done without parental approval is an extremely bad thing to do. Like it or not, the people most likely to have the best interest of children at heart are the parents. The parents, more than any other people in that child's life, are typically the people with the best interests of the child most at heart. But that bothers feminists and these activists, so they want to take the power away from the parents. Here, the Canadian court prohibits the father from interfering with 14-year-old girl's sex change medical treatments. Father now faces punishment if he even discusses it. Yeah, we did just talk about this, but this was an update from the first time we talked about this issue. And here's the fellow here. Trying to remember his name. I wrote it down, but now I can't remember it. But this fellow has been prohibited of talking about it, the issue, and he gave an interview with a lady, Lynn something, and I forget her name, and then that interview was forced down off the internet. I think it's been posted elsewhere. This is a psychologist who encouraged his daughter to start medical transition therapy. This is the radical lesbian lawyer who was allowed to represent his daughter, Rob Hoagland's daughter, without his permission. All of these people had a connection to the school, and the school counselor did not even inform the father of these things going on until after it was all in place. This is the doctor who is administering the hormones. Who dismissed the father out of hand. This is the Supreme Court Justice who presided over the case, a known radical feminist, pro-transgender woman. Folks, these people are embedded in the decision-making positions of power throughout our culture. They intend to strip parents of their power. They intend to ramrod their ideological nonsense into every area of your life, leaving nothing untouched. This started in the 1970s when feminists got into university and created women's studies programs, and they've put out these kinds of ideological idiots into all of our society. They now are in the positions of power, making the decisions and stripping regular people of the power over their own lives. Here's another justice, Supreme Court justice in BC, who reprimanded the father for not calling his daughter a she, or a he. And this harkens right back to Peterson's concern about the laws about using pronouns. Peterson warned about this 5-6 years ago, that they would be used maliciously. And here is a Supreme Court of Justice who threatened the father of his daughter, a father, for not calling his daughter a she. The pronoun issue, right there. This man, Hoagland, could go to jail for not calling his daughter a he. It's in the courts right now. People who laugh this stuff off have their heads in the sand. Every year this is getting worse. There are nooses around every man's neck throughout Canada and the US, and every year they're tightening it a little bit more. There should be outrage about this. But unfortunately, by the time that the bulk of the population gets outraged, it will be too late. The laws will be fully in place. There'll be precedent for all of it, and it'll take nothing short of a civil war to root it out. So I think that's all I have in the updates on this transgender issue. Now, I have some things to discuss about the rail blockades in Canada, and I want to emphasize that this issue is important to everyone outside of Canada as well, because it is a case study in how these kinds of sick ideologies and weak leaders who buy into these ideologies can actually bring about the destruction of an entire country, even a wealthy country. And the beauty of this particular incident is that it's happening right now, right before our eyes. Why is that not going here? Okay, so is this the one I got? Yeah. So let's go over some articles talking about the Wet'suwet'en people and the the gas link pipeline that's planned to go through their territory, and the rail blockades that are going on in Canada, because it's not just about the blockades, it's not about the gas link pipeline. This is about #ShutDownCanada, which behind it is a group that want to throw wrenches in every democratic, capitalistic country in the world in order to bring their economies to their knees and sweep in and take them over. Sounds conspiratorial. It is conspiratorial. But let's look at what some of the writers are saying about this issue. 7,000 jobs that have vanished are just a start. Those 7,000 jobs would have resulted in many more due to spin-offs, locally, provincially, federally, even internationally. This is from Walter Schneider. Lauren Gunter writes in the National Post, Tech Frontier cancellation entirely Justin Trudeau's fault. Yes, indeed it is. The project cancellation also means that the radical fringe is in charge of Canada, not the government, the courts, or the police. And that is true. The radical fringe is operating with impunity. And we saw this when the Antifa people and other left-wing groups were protesting Janice Fiamengo, and they were pulling fire alarms or blocking people from getting in and out of buildings, and the police did nothing. Little by little, these groups have gotten emboldened, more and more emboldened. Now they're setting up fires on railway tracks openly. They're videoing it and publishing it because they know nobody's going to do anything about it. And they're even publishing it on Twitter, and they're attaching their handles to it, their group names, and their hashtag #ShutDownCanada. These people have zero interest in the GasLink pipeline. Their only interest is in shutting down democratic capitalistic countries. And they're not even trying to hide it. Tech Chief Executive Don Lindsay wrote in a letter to Trudeau on Sunday that the company was withdrawing its application for approval of the oil sands project that would have created 7,000 jobs because the countrywide blockades against Coastal GasLink pipeline had been allowed to get out of control. Lindsay was worried Teck would be next. You're a smart man, Lindsay. You're a very smart man. I'm Canadian, though I don't live there right now. But I don't blame you one bit. You're darn right to get out of there. Your investment is not safe in Canada. Take your money and run while you can. If you want to know Canada's energy and environmental policy, go ask the eco-radicals funded by U.S. billionaires. Well, not just U.S., but global billionaires. Because they're the ones making the decisions now. These radical left-wing billionaires like Soros and the people behind Extinction Rebellion and Antifa and all those people. But Trudeau was to blame to this too. He came out when he first got elected and said Canada is the first transnational nation, or was not a nation. And he said that Canada had no core identity. And he's gone with a vengeance to prove that he thinks that way and to turn Canada into exactly that. Here, Alex St. Germain brought this to my attention. Could Canada soon face a vigilante problem? And this is in Maclean's magazine. Okay. Now, Maclean's magazine is pretty left. And we're going to see the spin that they put it on this. Oh, I think that's got out of order here. This has been appropriated by spoiled leftist revolutionaries bent on making Canada into a totalitarian state in the name of freedom. Oh, the irony, the lies. That's right. I think there's more on this up ahead. So we'll come back to that. The Toronto Sun, Gunter says that now that climate crusaders have ruined the economy, what's the solution? Well, they don't have solutions. That's the point. They're trying to bring democratic, capitalistic countries down to their knees, to destroy their economies, make them ripe for takeover, and then appeal to the citizenry with promises of socialist utopias to get voted in. In short, what is Greta cult's alternative to conventional economic development? They have no alternatives. They only complain. The deadly effects of, quote, green virus are going to spread beyond the oil and gas industry and beyond Alberta's economy. Yeah, it already has. That is true. It has in the form of hashtag #ShutDownCanada. I'm just going to pop this up here just from Carl K. I hint you and Janice, you and Janice should review the details and reaction of Prokect Melody. I don't know what that is, but maybe you can put some links up for us and maybe have a look into it. I can't promise. because I never heard of that. Global news here. A car was engulfed in flames on Wednesday on the railway tracks at Shannonville Road in Tyendinaga, Ontario. Firefighters arrived on scene to extinguish the fire, and it is currently unknown if protesters set the fire. Well, come on. A car doesn't roll itself up onto railway tracks, spill out its own gasoline, light a cigarette, and burn itself up in protest. And this is the first time in my life in Canada I've ever even heard of such a thing happening. And it's near Tyendinaga. And it's not the protesters you think? I mean, really, it's not yet known. Please. Here's Terence Corcoran saying in the Financial Post, the blockades are a clash over socialism, not Indigenous rights and climate change. Exactly. This is what we've been saying from the start. This is so obvious. But I'm glad that organizations like Financial Post are writing these articles, because nobody believes people on the internet. They rather believe government-paid media organizations like CBC. We're talking Canadians in general. They're going to believe CBC, even though CBC is a liberal propaganda machine. And even though liberals have bought to the tune of $600 million virtually all of the other ordinary media organizations, with a few small exceptions, Canadians still believe their lies. Anyways, let's see what a couple of quotes out of the Financial Post here. The blockades themselves are an ideological construct designed to help the radical left, socialists, and agglomerations of anti-capitalists to impose a new economic model on Canada and the rest of the world. Yes, yes, and triple yes. That is what's going on. The question is whether enough people will wake up to this and kick out of power people like Trudeau, will lose their tolerance for Antifa and Extinction Rebellion and all the rest of these militant groups trying to tell us how to live our lives and trying to destroy the economy. Are enough people really going to wake up to that? I have my doubts. As for the climate, it is merely a pretext, a marketing tool for radicals who aim to bring down capitalism. I actually, 3 weeks ago, maybe there's good things coming out of this, out of these blockades, because 3 weeks ago I would have never believed anybody would openly state the truth in a legitimate public periodical. But here it is. It's been written there in black and white. And maybe this is because they've pushed it too far, the radicals, in Canada at least. And here, another Wet'suwet'en hereditary sub-chief speaks out against protest leaders. Now these are part of the legitimate hereditary sub-chiefs as far as I know, and we're going to get into that in a minute. Keeping in mind that the Wet'suwet'en people and their elected leaders have voted in favor of this GasLink project that is going to bring them serious economic advantages. These so-called, this is a quote from another of the hereditary chiefs who was speaking out against the rebels, the protester group. These 5 so-called hereditary chiefs who say they are making decisions on behalf of all Wet'suwet'en do not speak for the Wet'suwet'en. And this is what I said a week and a half ago. They do not speak for the Wet'suwet'en, Gary Naziel said. They are neither following nor abiding by our traditional laws. They are changing them to suit their own purposes to benefit themselves, he told the Globe and Mail. If you remember when I showed some of their financial statements, that group is not the Wet'suwet'en tribe, it is the office of the Wet'suwet'en Society. They are a kind of a splinter group. with other purposes. They are $14 million in debt, and they're paying $2 million per year in salaries. All paid for by donations from the government and other organizations. And as well, this is a corporation that we're talking about, the Office of the Wet'suwet'en Society. We are a matrilineal system. We inherit our lineage from our mothers. Alphonse Gagnon, Warner Naziel, and Frank Alec are not the Wet'suwet'en nation. Mr. Gagnon and Mr. Naziel are Gitxsan. Mr. Alec is from Lake Babine Nation. This makes them name holders, not hereditary chiefs. They're posing as hereditary chiefs. Name holders cannot have any say for what happens on our territories. They cannot make decisions on behalf of the clan. There you go. I identified 5 of those so-called hereditary chiefs who are behind these blockades and who have stirred up this national crisis in Canada. They're not even hereditary chiefs, in fact. They're con artists then, in other words. Mr. Naziel also disputes the way that 2 of the men, Warner Naziel, I don't know if it's any relation, oh, there it is, who is his cousin, and Mr. Alec assumed their leadership roles. I don't know if I need to read through this bit. All 3 were stripped of their titles. They did not get their names the proper way they took them. And apparently this is a very big deal in that community. They're not legitimate hereditary leaders. They have no right to speak on behalf of the people, and yet they are stirring up this problem right across Canada, and they're blocking the legitimately negotiated deals that every other First Nation in the area agreed to and will profit from. And they're not even legitimate people, legitimate chiefs. Here's a clip from a Twitter. This group, they say, the Rising Tide Toronto is one of these militant activist groups that are using this issue for their own purposes and drumming up support to come down and put more blockades on just outside of Toronto. Here's Rising Tide Toronto. Rising Tide Toronto, a grassroots collective that challenges environmental justices on Turtle Island through direct action. No, they are just opportunistic anarchists. Here's another group, Mining Injustice Solidarity Network. There's all kinds of these left-wing militant groups out there. And of course they all follow each other on Twitter, they're all connected. Here's Extinction Rebellion Toronto, who also follows those Rising Tide Toronto groups. Extinction Rebellion has no connection to First Nations people. So why are they in on the action here? Obviously, they are anarchist socialists who are just there to try to destroy the economies of capitalists and democratic countries, just like that Financial Post article pointed out. Here they are claiming that they are successfully, peacefully blockaded the trail line in Toronto in support of these other First Nations groups. They don't care about the First Nations groups. They only care about destroying the economy of Canada. That's their goal. I heard them speaking at 8 years ago and 10 years ago along these same lines about destroying the capitalist system, bring down the patriarchy, destroy capitalism, bring in socialism. That's their goal they're at right now. And here is their Twitter page here. Which side are you on? On the side of police enforcing the will of lying politicians and corporate profit, or the side committed to decolonization and defense of Mother Earth and all life? I mean, the arrogance of claiming that you are the protectors of Mother Earth right there is a sign of mental illness. They're hypocrites. Here's Rising Tide Toronto, and one of their followers is Extinction Rebellion Toronto. Black Lives Matter is another, and Rising Tide Toronto is following Black Lives Matter Toronto. No surprise here, all of these left-wing, anti-capitalist, anti-democratic groups are connected. Here's a little description from Wikipedia of Extinction Rebellion. Started in 2018. Receives funding from the likes of the guy who was promoting Greta Thunberg. Here's the guy who started Extinction Rebellion, and he was actually an organic farmer. That's his expertise. He was an organic farmer in Great Britain, in UK. Here is an article in the Toronto Star, which is a very left-wing newspaper in Canada. 200 lawyers and legal scholars say the settler governments are breaking international law, not the Wet'suwet'en hereditary chiefs. Well, we just saw that those hereditary chiefs are illegitimate. So they have no right to have these protests. Now, there's questions about two others of the hereditary chiefs, which I haven't seen an analysis on. I don't know if they're legitimate or not, because there's 5 in total behind that office of the Wet'suwet'en Society, which is not a First Nation group. It is a corporation. Need to keep remembering that. It is a corporation with $14 million of debt. As lawyers and legal academics, let me expand this up a little bit here. As lawyers and legal academics living and working on this part of Turtle Island, now called Canada, we write to demand an end to ongoing violations of Indigenous nations' internationally recognized right to free, prior, and informed consent. For example, with the Trans Mountain and Coastal Gas Link pipelines routed through unceded Indigenous lands, including Wet'suwet'en lands. This is their claim. Why is this not going forward here? I'm sure I have more stuff on this. Huh. I'm pretty sure there's more here. Just one second. Yeah, I don't know why that just stopped going forward here. Let me get this. Did we touch on this? Yeah, we did this one. Okay, so it just somehow lost its place. I have to find it again here. This is it here. Sorry for the disruption there. While the Supreme Court has officially recognized that Canada was not in fact terra nullius, nobody's land, before Europeans. Yeah, the Supreme Court recognized that land was populated before. Okay, fine. Attention. These matters of government-sanctioned lawlessness are being committed all across Turtle Island. Okay, the use of Turtle Island here, of course, is not accidental. They're refusing to go by the name. Well, Turtle Island refers to all of North America in Native American terms, but this really. They're refusing to use the word Canada because that's the jurisdiction they actually live in. And their treaties are with Canada. They're not with anything called Turtle Island. The treaties are all negotiated with Canada and the US. Here, Bev Jacobs, the principles of Haudenosaunee laws are based on unconditional love, kindness, compassion, respect, and the power of having a good mind, to name a few. This is how we carry on our responsibilities to each other as human beings. Well, those are flowery words, but do they hold up? I don't think so. That article about, the terrible things going on to First Nations in Canada and how they need to, Canada needs to do more and all the rest of that, is written by 4 women. One was the one we just saw before, and here's another one of the authors. This woman is a Sikh. She came, according to her, it seems like when she's a feminist as well, that she came to Canada illegally. And she supports the First Nations because they kept her in. This is, I'm reading what I've read about in this, in her background here. Now, I could have some of this wrong, so I'm not 100% sure, but it implied that it was them that helped her stay in Canada in spite of legal problems. So she is a Sikh. And she is writing articles and supporting this blocking of this pipeline by an illegitimate group of hereditary leaders. Here she says, as an immigrant on these lands who was once with precarious legal status. Okay, this is where I was referring to, precarious legal status. That means you're here illegally. I was welcomed and mentored by Indigenous elders, matriarchs, land defenders. My allegiance will forever be with Indigenous nations, never Canadian state who exploits, deports, detains many of my community. So here she is being supported by Canadian tax dollars or whatever work she's doing, and she will never have her allegiance to Canada. In her own words. Her allegiance will never be to a Canadian state who exploits, deports, detains many in my community. Well, if you're being detained and deported, it's probably because you're doing illegal crap. That's just the way it is. Maybe you should rethink. Here's one of the other authors. I'm a Treaty 6 descendant and I'm a proud, well, I can't pronounce that. And the second one is, okay, let me try, Nehiya and Anishinaabe woman. I love Idle No More, a grassroots movement. So what is Idle No More? Well, here's the other fella here, who's one of the artists. 4 of them who wrote that article. Rights for all, impunity for none. Impunity for none. Isn't that interesting? Impunity for none except those people who are carrying out illegal blockades, blowing things up, derailing trains and setting fires. Impunity for none, Alex? I don't think you really mean that. Speaking out, standing with, struggling on, Secretary General Amnesty International. Lots of imagery of good things there, but in fact just hypocrisy and empty words. Here's Indigenous Foundations in an article here at this web. I should put the link in. This is quite interesting, and this bit explains some of what the First Nations beliefs are about their relationship to the land. Now, this stuff gets really, really complicated when you start to try and reconcile Western European beliefs in private land ownership with First Nations belief that no one owns the land. These ideas are incompatible. So, on either side, it's when on either side it's difficult to reconcile these ideas, because in the First Nations are claiming it's their land, but on the other side of it, their tradition denies that anyone owns the land. So they're in a kind of a weird, weak moral position when they say you have to get off our land, when their own moral tradition says that nobody owns the land, that the land owns the people. So let's just read through this a bit. Most First Nations did not believe that pieces of land could or should be owned by individuals. Humans, along with all other living beings, belonged to the land. The land provided for humans, and in turn, humans bore a responsibility to respect and care for it. Many Aboriginal peoples understand this as a reciprocal relationship with the land. European settlers arriving in North America brought with them concepts of private property ownership and the notion that humans could and should own land as a step towards, quote, civilization. So this raises up all kinds of philosophical questions about the legitimacy of land claims by people who claim you can't own land. Now, I'm not saying that we should just throw this out, because that we should throw out any of their concerns. Let's call them concerns over the land. And I think it's appropriate at this time in history to settle land boundary claims, because we will have a lot more peace and productivity with these issues settled and put to the side. But it still is worth noting that the land they claim is theirs is in fact not owned by them according to their own tradition that people do not own land. Having said that, let them own the land, and just get on with making some negotiations and stop holding the rest of the country hostage. What's really important here is that people, both non-Indigenous and Indigenous people, are suffering in poverty, and projects that could help all of them out are being held back because of the questionable motives of a small group of 5 so-called hereditary chiefs, 3 of whom are illegitimate, and 2 of whom we've heard very little from. The rest of the First Nations, and these are hereditary chiefs who are not empowered to negotiate treaties. They're not empowered, they're not elected. They're not representatives of the Wet'suwet'en people. I'm quite happy to see these other philosophical issues pushed to the side, so long as we can have a settlement that is helpful to all parties involved. But that settlement, as far as I can see, has already been done. And these 5 are illegitimately blocking it, and their decision to illegitimately block it in order to raise money to pay off their $14 million debt and $2 million of salaries a year, their effort is being taken over by these anarchist, fascist, anti-fascist, they call them, groups, but these anarchists who are trying to bring democratic and capitalistic countries to their knees by destroying their economies. What we need now is a strong leader in the Prime Minister's office, and that's the biggest thing we're missing for the past 6 years, 5 years. Here's idle no more. It's time for our people to rise up, take back our role as caretakers and stewards of the land. Well, no, we can't roll back the clock to 300, 400, 500 years ago. You're not the caretakers of stewards of all of Turtle Island anymore. Even if you think you once were, you're not today. You don't have a legitimate moral claim to that role. That role belongs to every last one of us human beings on the planet Earth. Does not belong to strictly First Nations people. That doesn't mean that you're excluded from that role, but you cannot claim that role and take it away from other human beings. This is the Idle No More calls for change. Idle No More Defenders of the Land, a network of Indigenous communities in land struggle, have joined together to issue this common call for escalating action. Our message is clear in accordance with the principles of coexistence and mutual respect between Indigenous and non-Indigenous peoples. Okay. And you can go and see their website if you want to find more about that. But here's one page on what they are about. Actively resist violence against women and hold a national inquiry into missing and murdered Indigenous women and girls, and involve Indigenous women in the design, decision-making process and implementation of this inquiry as a step towards initiating a comprehensive and coordinated national action plan. Now, we were discussing these missing Indigenous women and girls issues in Ottawa some years ago, and there was a Native American chief who came to speak to the Canadian Association for Equality, and he wanted to include the murdered and missing Indigenous men in that. And that group tried for a long time to include the men. There are 3 or 4 times as many as 3 or 4 men missing for every woman that's missing. This is a matriarchal lineage culture. And they're only interested in the missing and suffering women. Why is that? If you're going to stand up as morally superior representatives of your culture, why are you not concerned about the missing and murdered men, of which there are 3 or 4 for every woman? Why is it? You lose credibility when you refuse to add that into your concerns. You are telling every last Native American Indigenous man out there that we really don't care if you disappear, killed, murdered, whatever happens to you. So what? This is a matriarchal lineage society. The Canadian government went along with that, and they refused to add the missing Indigenous men and boys into their inquiry, in spite of the fact that there was 3 to 4 men missing for every woman. And you're going to try and lecture us on moral superiority? I don't think so. Okay, that's all I have on that section. I think there's a few more screenshots on the blockade issue here. I just wanted to pop up. Let me just see what they are. All right, now I wanted to end it like this, because after all of that analysis about what's really going on here in our culture with these these anarchists, globalists, trying to destroy the economy in a capitalist and democratic country. What does Maclean's magazine print? What is Maclean magazine's, this Shannon Gormley, I can only assume is a feminist, because only feminists can be so stupid. What does she think is our biggest concern when we have anarchist leftists, Antifa, and all of those groups blocking railways, threatening more action, bringing the economy to the knees, and the government not doing anything about it, Trudeau not doing anything about it? They're moving so slow that they're putting a huge damage on the Canadian economy that will probably be felt for a decade or a generation. What is she going to say is our biggest concern? Well, here, have a look for yourself. Canada could Canada soon face a vigilante problem? Researchers in Europe have identified the conditions in which far-right vigilantes emerge. Canada ticks a lot of boxes. In the face of an ongoing far-left malicious attempt to destroy Canada from within and an international movement called #ShutDownCanada, she's concerned about a far-right response. Read this. Canada should prepare to confront a surge in white supremacist vigilantes. There's that boogeyman again. That there will, in fact, be such a surge isn't certain. It's even less certain the vigilantes would be violent. Oh, so what does this say? This is these terrible, horrible people talking on the internet? That's what you're worried about? But as Canada copes with a rail system shut down by Indigenous protesters, it is not, by the way. It is shut down by these external groups who are taking advantage of the issue. It faces a heightened risk that a band of racist bully boys will designate themselves the nation's hall monitors of vital infrastructure. This is her concern. This is feminism. The idiocy that knows no depth. Here. Does the country have a base support for far-right vigilantism amongst the public and politicians? Imagine that. Far-right vigilantes will always find support from far-right media. But while every rebel mouth, and they're referring to rebel media, may complain of being silenced, their real problem and Canada's advantage is that they're also cartoonishly hideous in their views, comportment, and every other conceivable quality that no one of consequence can bother to listen to them. They're just tacky carnival barkers who exchanged whatever dubious degree of dignity they once unconvincingly pantomimed for ticket sales. Then they discovered ticket sales were low. Yeah, there we have it. That's her concern as the country is being set on fire by far-left vigilante groups, while feminists are putting in bigoted laws against men, while a noose is being put around every one of your necks and she's pulling it tighter every year. She wants you to believe that our biggest risk is the possible vigilante groups. And one of the people that she mentioned in the article was some guy, a local farmer who went with his pickup truck and calmly dismantled one of the barricades while the protesters hurled insults at him. Wake up, you feminist moron. Your friends, the far left, Antifa, BLM, Extinction Rebellion, Greta and her whole cult. These are the people who are actively trying to destroy the country now. Trudeau is a feminist, and he's not even barely lifting a finger to slow down the process. I mean, when these are the people who are receiving the big salaries to write their opinions and publish them in popular magazines in Canada, well, maybe we just have to let this infectious disease run its course and clean up the country after they've destroyed it. Get some popcorn, come on down to the Dominican Republic, and we'll watch it and enjoy the show. And when they've destroyed it beyond all recognition, maybe we go help them out. Okay, so that was maybe a little bit hyperbolic. But anyways, I think that might be everything I have here. Did we talk about the trans issues? I think we did, yes. Yeah, we talked about all these guys. So that's all I have for today. That was an hour and 20 minutes. It sure goes by fast on my side here. I want to thank you guys for for joining me for this discussion. And hey, Michael, thanks for reminding everyone of this. More coffee helps. More coffee helps cope with the watching the world burn from the Dominican Republic. As usual, you know, folks, especially men out there, be careful. That noose is slowly tightening around your neck. Try to escape it. In the meantime, we'll see you probably on Monday next. I think my weekend's going to be fairly busy trying to get caught up on some projects. And I'll remind you that there'll be a new Fiamenga file coming out soon. The script is written, and so it'll be going into production probably tomorrow. I'll hopefully get that out to you early next week. It's going to be a very interesting one. I find it's powerful. I think you'll enjoy it. Yeah, and I say, I should be the one saying this, Michael. Hit that like button and share this video and support us on Studio Brulé. And you can see the website links at studiobrule.com, and links to PayPal are also on the front page of the YouTube channel. Thanks again for joining me, and join us on Monday for another coffee session, a casual discussion of current things that pop up. Ciao for now, and enjoy the rest of your day.